Um, so the first one I got wrong was actually number 3, but and I also got 17 part A wrong, but I don't think we have to correct those, but I did get them wrong. So yeah. But the other one I got wrong was number 6, and that was like with the islands. And I originally picked Island A, which was close to the mainland and pretty small. So when I looked at this question, I already knew that like closer islands to the mainland would be have more species on them. So I got rid of C, D, and E like right away. So I was between A and B. And I knew that because islands that were closer to mainland, like it allows more species from the mainland to get there, potentially. 50 kilometers is pretty far still, but it's a much better chance than 500, 1,000, or like 1,000. So I knew that like, I don't know, something that could swim could possibly get there. It has the best chance. So I was between a small one or a big one, and I picked the small one because I thought that like the more like close together, I guess they were, then like the higher chance there would be for reproduction. But I ended up learning that it doesn't really matter how often they reproduce. It's like how many different species there are. So a small island wouldn't have like the environmental ability to house tons of species because it might not have like different habitats, whereas like a bigger island like B could potentially house like a specialist species that wouldn't survive on A because it doesn't have the right food source, things like that, along with like generalists who'd be able to survive kind of anywhere. But like B could have different environments that would be necessary for other species, and there would be like more competition overall, I guess, because there's like more species to compete with, so the food web would be bigger and like all that kind of stuff. So like a close island that's bigger would be like the best option. And I did draw the diagram when I answered this, like the graph thing, and I got like the ones that crossed for me were small and close. So I just like assumed that it was like that one, but that's actually the growth rate, which I forgot. So yeah. So in the future, like I think I just need to like remember, I guess, like every little part of like what we go over in the notes, because when I drew this diagram, I thought that like I got it, but I just didn't remember what the diagram was actually showing, which I didn't even label, and I wasn't really sure which lines were which either, so I kind of guessed on that part. So I think just like studying the certain graphs that we go over would help me in the future for like more graphs that we do. And then I also got number 8 wrong, and that was the clear cutting one. So I answered E, which was 250 years, which was wrong. And I answered this wrong because I knew that species richness was not the growth of the populations. Like I knew that, but I just didn't know what it was. I just knew it wasn't that. I've come to find out that it is like how many different species, so I guess diversity technically, similar to that. But I ended up picking like the most amount of time possible out of all the answers, because I just figured that like if it takes that many years, like it has like that much, like a lot more time to develop more species and stuff. But the answer is actually B, 100 years, because that's when the climax should be around. So with the clear cutting, you go back to like primary succession basically, and you would move into secondary. So like it would take about 100 years to reach the climax, because like the whole ecosystem is basically starting over. You just have like the soil. So maybe not primary, but definitely secondary, depending on like, are all the trees gone, like what the environment like was like before. So like they're basically starting all over again. And it would take about 100 years to reach the climax community, which is when the species would be at its, like all this, there would be the most species. And after that, it would start to decline. So it would reach climax, and then it would start going back down again. And then I got number 10 wrong, which was the graphs about biotic potential. And I got that wrong because I didn't know which one it was. I knew that it was increasing, so I got rid of C and D. And then I also got rid of E because that one looks really weird. Obviously it isn't E. So I was between a linear graph and an exponential graph. And I thought that linear would be my best bet because I honestly just didn't know. So I just thought that like increasing time would increase population, and so I guessed linear. But the correct answer is B, which is the exponential graph. And I learned that biotic potential is kind of like if the like population just kept increasing at its best potential, so it didn't really have any limiting factors, and that would be an exponential growth. And that would help me answer future questions because, again, with the graphs, I just need to like remember what they look like when we go over them in class because I'm not very good with graphs at all. So, and then I also got 16 part A wrong because I originally said country Z had the largest rate of population growth. But that's wrong because the graphs, again, they just confused me because they all look like they're increasing. And I said Z because I thought that they were all like pretty similar to each other and there wasn't really like a decrease as you went up to the older people. It kind of just stayed the same. But it was still increasing a little bit. But the correct answer is actually X because if you look at the bottom like bar of the young people, which are 0 to 14, if you took that, and they're at like about 10 million, I think, like they might be a little over actually, but they're kind of near 10 million. And the way the rest of the graph is, if you went from the top down, if you start at the very top, the next one was like, it's like bigger, and then the one after that gets bigger, and they get significantly bigger gaps between them as you go from the top to the bottom. So in theory, the one that's at 10 million on the bottom, the next one would probably be like 12 million, and it would keep going from there. So it would go 12 to like 15 to 17. It would just keep getting bigger like that way. Whereas the one that I chose, which was Z, it'd probably go from like 10 to maybe 10.5. It wouldn't be as big of a growth. But X is showing a much bigger growth. So that's why. And I said that Y is the smallest, and it still is the smallest because it's not really growing at all. Most of them are kind of flat, and then there's like a little jump and more flat. So and it's also, the graph starts at like 3 million-ish. So it also just doesn't have a big like rate of change, but country X does. So that will be the correct answer. So this would help me in the future because I didn't really look at that part of the graph. I didn't think about it that way. I was kind of looking at the stuff that was already there instead of like making inferences about what it would look like in the future. So I guess like it helped me to, on future tests, think outside the box a little more because if I had thought of that, it makes a lot of sense of why X would be continued to increase. So rather than looking at like what's already there, and I would just look at like what it could be. And then I also got part C. I think it's C. Yeah, part C wrong for 16. And I got this part wrong because instead of describing like an incentive, I described more of like a plan, I guess. And even though my plan it would have satisfied the question, it's a plan, not an incentive, so it's wrong. So that's why I got that wrong. I thought that incentive like meant plan, I guess. I don't know. The wording just kind of confused me there. But an incentive similar to what I said could be that instead of like definitely doing instead of like lowering the growth rate through like putting contraceptives in different places, like the government could try to lower the cost of that through like bills or acts and laws and whatever, and that would work because it would favor like the population with like a lower income, because on the graphs that we looked at in class, like it showed that women who were like younger and didn't really go to college and didn't really have jobs were more likely to have more kids than women who were like pretty successful and went to college, because kids are a big responsibility and they get in the way sometimes. So like those women wanted to like get a good start into their career before going that route, whereas people who were unemployed or didn't have as much money, they wanted kids, so they decided to have them, which is fine. But they end up having like a lot of them. And sometimes they can't afford contraceptives, so lowering the cost of them would help favor that population, and it would kind of give the underlying meaning that like our population is like increasing a lot, and so it would kind of reduce the growth rate a little bit, and that's what the question is asking, so that would work. The only drawback would be companies who make contraceptives probably would not want to do that because they would be losing money. So the government might have to like give them funds or something in order to make it so that they're not losing as much money, which wouldn't be the best scenario, but it would still work. Yeah, and like I said, I got 17 wrong too, but I don't think we have to correct that, but if we do, just let me know. I forgot to say it before, but my like knowledge that I gained from number 16, part C, would help me in future questions, because like I learned to like try to pay more attention to what the directions are saying, because it does say incentive and not like plan or like strategy. So like I didn't really know what incentive meant. I thought that that's what they were asking was for like a plan, but they were kind of asking for like a more persuasive thing rather than like a direct like we need to reduce the population. They were kind of doing it more like not like underlyingly, I guess. They had like an underlying meaning to their strategy. So yeah, in the future I just need to like pay more attention to the directions and like know what they're asking.